Welcome to the Appropriations Committee hearing. My name is Rob Clements. I'm from Elmwood and represent Legislative District 2. I serve as chair of this committee. We'll start off by having members do self-introductions, starting with my far right.
Steve Bergman, I represent District 47.
Lauren Lippincott, District number 34.
Anna Wishart, District 27 in West Lincoln and Lancaster County.
Robert Dover, District 19.
Myron Doran, District 30.
Christy Armandares, District 18.
Assisting the committee today is Tamara Hunt, our committee clerk, and to my left is our fiscal analyst, Bill Bibbin. Our pages today are Malcolm from Omaha, a UNL student, and Kate from Kansas, a UNL student. At the entrance, you'll find green testifier sheets on the table. If you're planning on testifying today, please fill out a green testifier sheet and hand it to the committee clerk when you come up to testify. If you will not be testifying but want to go on record as having a position on an item being heard today, there are white sign-in sheets at the entrance where you may leave your name and related information. These sign-in sheets will become exhibits in the permanent record after today's hearing. To better facilitate today's proceeding, I ask that you abide by the following procedures. Please silence your cell phones. The order of testimony will be introducer, proponents, opponents, neutral, and closing. Except, when we hear testimony regarding agencies, we'll first hear from a representative of the agency. Then we will hear testimony from anyone who wishes to speak on the agency's budget request. When you come to testify, spell your first and last name for the record before you testify. Be concise. We request that you limit your testimony to 5 minutes or less. Written materials may be distributed to the committee members as exhibits only while testimony is being offered. Hand them to the page for distribution when you come up to testify. If you have written testimony but do not have 12 copies, please raise your hand now so the page can make you copies for you. With that, we will begin today's hearing with Agency 32, Educational Lands and Funds, and I've been asked to combine that with Agency 62, Board of Examiners and Land Surveyors. Is that right? A combination. So Agency 62, because they're connected, we're agencies 32 and 62. First with Agency 32, representative, come forward.
Good morning. My name is Casey Sherlock, CaseySherlock. Thank you for having me today, Senator Clements and members of the Appropriations Committee. I am a representative of Agency 32 because I am the Nebraska State Surveyor. The Nebraska State Surveyor is appointed by the Board of Educational Lands and Funds, and I manage the State Surveyor's Office, which is Division 2. The reason I'm connected to Agency 62 is statute makes me secretary for Agency 62, the Board of Examiners. So I'm merely here today to, I do have some materials that I can pass around too. And I forgot to give my green sheet. I'm just here today to offer my support of the committee's recommendations for the appropriations of Agency 32 Division 2. I am the only division of Agency 32 that is appropriated with general funds. The remainder of Agency 32 is cash funded through the operation of the Board of Educational Lands and Funds. I wouldn't be able to answer very many questions about the remainder of Agency 32, but if you have anything that you'd like to ask me about Division 2 of the State Surveyor's Office, I'm a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that. I've passed around a pamphlet that is distributed by the National Association of Surveyors. This is materials that surveyors like to distribute to let people know who we are, what we do. It's an example of what kind of materials there are. The state doesn't have a material pamphlet like that, but I thought it would be good for you to have some information on us if you ever wanted to know any additional things about surveyors. I do have 2 letters of support, one on behalf of Division 2 and one on behalf of Divisions 1, 3, 4, and 5 that I'll also pass around to the committee.
Would the pages get those, please?
I was appointed the Nebraska State Surveyor on January 1st, 2018. So I'm just into my 6th year as State Surveyor. I'm the 8th State Surveyor to ever be appointed in the state of Nebraska. The State Surveyor's office started around 1907 with Robert Harvey. He was the original State Surveyor. I'm from Alliance, Nebraska. Went to school at Shattern State. Got my license in 2005. And I think that's probably about all I have to say.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Senator Erdman?
Thank you, Senator Clements. Mr. Sherlock was also the county surveyor of Alliance, which is Boxview County. And I got to know Casey there when he was on the NACO board. He and I served together, so I appreciate him coming. So are you the only person from this division that's going to come in and testify?
That's correct.
Are you familiar with the property that a gentleman in Chapel is trying to purchase from the board?
I wasn't at this last meeting. I had a surveyor seminar in Kearney, so I missed this last meeting. I know that there was something on their agenda regarding that issue, but the details of that I'm not familiar with, Senator.
Just curious, there's a parcel of land that was adjacent to the school lease land, and that land is sold. And it appears that now that that land is sold, that piece of property is going to be landlocked. And the person who farms it was at the meeting Friday. He shared that with the board. I'm not sure that how they resolved that, but he has a situation where he can't get his equipment in there to farm that. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there. I think they're going to ask you to do a survey there to figure out what exactly they own.
They did ask me to start research into that area. I wasn't sure what the particulars are of the result of that. They asked me to look into that particular area. I think it's adjacent to Union Pacific Railroad.
Right.
And that, I believe in that particular section, the school lands still, the school lands were given all sections 16 and 36 by the Nebraska Constitution. And that particular section 16, I believe it is, they still own the land under the railroad, but the railroad maintains a right of way over the top of that land, similar to any kind of a county road easement, similar to that of that nature. But
So
that's about all I've got as far as.
Well, the farmer's trying to figure out how he's going to farm now. He can't get in there. So
Okay.
he used to farm the whole thing, and then they sold that other parcel to a different person.
Oh.
And so now they're kind of landlocked.
Okay.
But the size of the equipment today is pretty difficult to get in and out of there.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
anyway,
I
appreciate
will
that.
definitely be involved with that, I'm sure.
Take a look at that.
As you pointed out, I do survey for Board of Ed Lands and Funds, so I do keep track of tracts of land owned by the school land trust, so that we help to protect the boundaries of the school land trust properties.
Are there any other questions? Senator Dover?
I thought in the state of Nebraska, you can't landlock anybody.
Well, you can't, but it's going to be very inconvenient for him to get across that with that size of equipment he has.
There are a lot of school trust sections that are landlocked just by the virtue of it being every section 16 and 36. There are a lot of sections that are isolated just because the land around it was patented to individual landowners, and sometimes county roads didn't reach the school section. But usually there's somebody that borders the school land that does want to lease it. Usually, if it's completely isolated by one, say, large ranch, then we're really stuck with that one person leasing that school land.
Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Are there additional proponents for agency 32 or 62? Oh, are you on the switch to 62 now? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So, hello, I'm Casey Sherlock, CASEY SHERLOCK. I'm appearing on behalf of Agency 62, the Board of Examiners for Land Surveyors. The Board of Examiners for Land Surveyors is charged with the duty of administering the licensure and the profession of land surveying in the state of Nebraska. statute makes me secretary, ex officio secretary of the board. It's one of the extra duties I get without any, I think it's down towards the end. But the Board of Examiners is made up of 5 members. 4 members are land surveyors, that are licensed land surveyors, and 1 member is a layperson that's appointed by the governor. I work with that board in administering any of the licensure, examination, testing, continuing education. As I said earlier in my previous testimony, I was in Kearney on last week, Thursday and Friday, for a surveyor seminar. As the state surveyor, I'm considered one of the leader of surveying in the state, so I'll go to those professional societies, and I'll help educate our surveyors, keep them up to speed on standards and rules and regulations and things. So if you can see the historical budget request of the Board of Examiners, it has not changed. And we operate the division. It's probably one of the smallest cash fund appropriations you might see, but we do well with what we have. Our revenues are, because of the biannual renewal of land surveyors, every 2 years we have a very large revenue influx, and then the opposite year we have 0, essentially. So we operate off of revenues from 1 year for 2 years. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I have one question. The committee preliminary recommendation, are you in support of that?
I am in support of that. Yes.
All right. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And we're combining Agency 32, Educational Lands and Funds, and Board of Examiners for Land Surveyors. Anyone else wishing to support that agency, please step forward.
Good afternoon, Chairman Clements, senators. I'm Jerry Penry, Jerry Penry. I'm the Chief Deputy State Surveyor. I work with State Surveyor Sherlock. Our agency manages the repository for land surveys. So if you were to have a survey done on your property, that survey would be filed in our office. We also have those surveys are digitally online, available to the public back to 1998. And the surveys from 1983 to 1998 are available on microfiche that we can be made available. So this agency is a very critical aspect for the public. A lot of different people use the material that we have digitized and online. So that's just basically, I'm just showing here for support and my appreciation for the appropriations for Agency 32. So I am very historically oriented. So if any of you have any questions about surveying in Nebraska or what else our office might do, I can answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Penry. Are there any questions? Senator
Thank you.
Dorn.
Chairman Clements, question then, do you, if there's I call it a dispute, maybe before it goes to court in Nebraska, then do they sometimes bring your office in, or do you help dissolve disputes when maybe something 100 years ago didn't get surveyed right? Or
The state surveyor does have the final authority. However, our rules and regulations state that we want the surveyors to handle it foremost between themselves. And ideally, then the landowners too would be, in an ideal situation, the landowners would agree upon a line. And so we are more or less a last resort.
so how many situations would you have where you're the last resort in a year or whatever? Very few.
Very few, yeah. We try to coach the surveyors to handle it, in an appropriate way that, they're not just coming to us for, I guess, a one-sided effort or whatever you might say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I had one question. I was curious to know, since surveying's been going on over 100 years, but now their equipment is much more digital and accurate, GPS. How accurate were the old surveys compared to the current measurements?
Okay, the surveys in Nebraska began in 1855. They measured with what's called a chain. It's a device that's divided into 100 links that's 66 foot long. You might wonder, where does that 66 foot comes from? If you've ever heard of the term rod, a lot of landowners, farmers will know that term. 4 rods make a chain. And most of the road right-of-way through Nebraska, especially rural Nebraska, is 66 foot wide. And so that's kind of the historical aspect of that. Now, some of the surveys were quite accurate. Some of them were not. And so that's a difficult question to answer, I guess, as far as in a blanket, so to speak. But we've evolved through the chain, and then they went through a steel tape, and then through EDM, which is electronic infrared beam, and now we're using the GPS. And so that allows us to measure, yes, more accurately, but foremost, more proficiently and quickly.
And when there's a difference, do you change the marker to your?
No, the markers have to stay. If it's an original government monument, it stays regardless of its position. Now, whether that could be completely off, I mean, substantially off, but where that original surveyor placed that marker, that stands for all time. Technology has no effect on moving or adjusting that marker.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Penry. Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. Define substantially.
It depends on
What's the furthest off you've ever seen?
the furthest I've ever seen, half mile.
Oh.
There are some surveys in the sandhills of Nebraska that were fraudulent. And mainly because the government had contract surveyors, and they were not working for the government. They were out there to make money for themselves. And so some of these surveys were fraudulent. If you look at, I think in some of your areas, you'll probably see some lines that are very crooked and so forth. So there is one I'm thinking of in the sandhills that it's a half mile off because they came in one direction and didn't measure all the way across.
What'd you do with that?
That marker stands. Yeah. So sometimes when you think that you're buying a section of ground, it's not a full 640 acres. So best to have it surveyed.
Thank you, Mr. Penry. Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, is there any other testifiers on agency 32 or 62? Either proponent, opponent, or neutral. Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on agencies 32 and 62. And now we'll open the hearing for agency 34, Nebraska Library Commission. You all got some history lesson there, didn't we?
Yes.
Thank you for taking the time, committee. Welcome, Director.
Good afternoon, Senators. Senators, I am Rod Wagner, Director of the Nebraska Library Commission. That is spelled RODWAGNER. Thank you for your time this afternoon. The Library Commission, by state statute, is charged with responsibility for statewide promotion, development, and coordination of library services. That includes working with all types of Nebraska libraries, public, school, college, university, and special libraries. I would like to address comment on the items in your preliminary recommendations that are not included in your preliminary numbers. And I go in order of your committee document. The first is Nebraska e-reads. This is a state program that provides funding for support of libraries' purchase of digital books, e-books, and audiobooks, also magazines, to make available to the public. The funding was first began, that is from state funds, back in 2014. And during the years that we have had that funding, we've had steady growth in the number of libraries that participate in the service. That is, we have a statewide consortium now numbering 192 libraries that join together to purchase and make available to their communities ebooks, audiobooks, and so forth. As that number grows, the number of people that program serves grows, and the usage of that service has steadily increased over the years. A very popular program. We get a lot of good comments about it. People find it very useful, and we're glad that we have achieved that. The state appropriate, I mentioned the 192 libraries that are included in the consortium. In addition, the Omaha Public Library and Lincoln City Libraries and the Ralston Library, which is in a situation where they collaborate with Omaha. They have a shared system. Those libraries are not part of the consortium, but they do share in the state funding that has been appropriated. And the allocation is based on service population. And on the back side of the handout that I gave you, top of the page, page 2, we show the current year allocation that is divided among the consortium libraries and then Lincoln, Omaha, and Ralston. The current year allocation in the middle and the amount that would be distributed to those libraries based on the funding request that we submitted. And all of those dollars are used for purchase of materials that it's specifically for that purpose. And it is used, the decisions that are made by library representatives that are part of the consortium. Of course, with Lincoln and Omaha, their own library staff make those choices. So that is the basis for the request we submitted. Significant increase in what we requested. Again, it's a combination of the increased number of libraries that are participating, the continued growth in the lending activity of those libraries, and of course, cost increases for the materials that are purchased. The next item is the Nebraska Access Program, which provides digital services made available statewide and available to all Nebraska residents. It's a grouping of digital services that provide such things as access to government publications, historical resources, legal, small business, etc., but also significantly educational resources that are heavily used by schools across the state. The databases are there for supporting the educational programs of the schools, and they're heavily used. The advantage here is that with a statewide arrangement, it makes available these resources to all schools on an equitable basis. Smaller school districts struggle with budgets that limit their ability to license some of these services. And so on a statewide basis, we're able to do that. And vendors much prefer working with a single entity than hundreds of individual entities. Our request was based for funding for the biennium was based on an estimate of 3.1% over our current subscription services for each year of the biennium. We also include a request for 2 new databases that allow us to provide separate packages for elementary and middle school and high school that we have not had. We actually have it currently because of a one-time funding source that was available to us. But in order to continue those services, we did include in our budget request funding for that continuation, which is $47,550 for the coming fiscal year. Following year, that would go up to $48,739. But again, we've had a good response to those packages put in place at the beginning of the school year, and we hope we are able to continue to provide those. Just 2 more items. The regional library systems, the 4 regional library systems that cover multi-county areas, those services are provided with funding from both state and federal sources. It's about 50-50. And our budget request for that item was based on a 5.5% increase for each year. And that 5.5% increase applies to both state and federal funds. And largely, the budgets of those regional offices, the majority is for staff, but there are also other expenses that they have, office space and operating expenses, travel for staff that work with libraries in their multi-county area. The last item is state aid to public libraries. The Library Commission for a number of decades has distributed state aid to public libraries using a formula with a base amount and a per capita amount. And we requested for the coming biennium an annual 5.5% increase for distribution to those libraries. So that's what I wanted to comment on, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Director. Are there any questions from the committee? Your worship.
Thank you for being here today, Director Reitner. So you're seeing an increase in utilization of your online services. What is the utilization rate for people coming in to the libraries in person?
You mean people who aren't going into the library to
Yeah,
borrow
to check
materials?
out physical, yeah. Do you have?
That's declined a bit, but it's also offset by the fact that libraries are doing a lot more programming, and people are coming in for that purpose. So even though the in-library checkout of the hardcover documents, the print documents, that's declined a bit, but not large.
Okay.
But the digital has really steadily increased.
Senator Armendariz.
Thanks, Senator Clements. Thanks, Director Wagner, for being here. I'm also interested in the ebooks and the audio books. Do you purchase these from a company? Because I'm intrigued, like, how do you compete with Amazon selling ebooks and the public library? giving them for free? Do you have a certain number that you check out like a hard book, or are they unlimited? Anybody can get them at any time? And do you have to come into the library to get them, or can you do that remotely?
You can borrow them via the internet from anywhere. You know, if you have access to the internet, you have a app that is used to find out what's available, and you can request to borrow that item. Because of limited numbers, you may have to be placed on hold for a period of time until eventually that item is available to you to download. But you can do that from anywhere. And the collection is growing, continues to grow. The consortium uses a company named Overdrive. The purchases are made through that vendor, and they come from the major publishers as well as other smaller publishers too.
So does Overdrive work directly with publishers, or,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
so you get them at a reduced rate than if you would get them off of?
Well, it varies, and fortunately, I have my colleague with me who works very closely with this service. She may follow me to give you a much better
That
answer
would be
than I
great.
would.
Yeah, so as you see an increase in electronic versions of reading, what is your plan for the brick and mortar buildings as that shifts to remote? Have you thought of a succession plan to fill those buildings as people don't come as much?
Libraries adapt, and they, as I said, they're doing a lot more programming. They're
What do you mean
getting
by
more and more
program?
into technology.
Okay,
Some libraries are using space for maker spaces,
okay.
devices used to create
Like
things.
DoSpace?
Like DoSpace.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's one
On
of
a
them,
much
but
smaller
what about?
scale, of course.
So and that's Omaha, they don't participate in this?
Omaha does,
They do, okay.
yes. And as I said, we have the 190 libraries in the consortium, and then we also have Lincoln, Omaha, and Ralston. But they also use the same company, Overdrive, to acquire their ebooks and audiobooks.
Are there other companies that would provide that?
I think there are some, and that my colleague would be a better person to answer that question.
I'll make sure that
Okay.
I know who to ask that question to.
I
So
hate to
you-
put her on the spot, but she really knows this stuff.
I'm sure
thoroughly.
she does.
Okay.
So you do have a succession plan to start filling those libraries with programming?
Well, that's decided on a community basis, but they're very adaptable and.
I'm just wondering, because I see rent in here. Yeah, it's office space. I don't know.
Oh,
if
that's for the library commission's office space.
Oh, that's only the library commission? How
Yeah,
many
that's
buildings is that
we're in the atrium building downtown.
in Lincoln?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Are there other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Director Wagner.
Thank you.
Are there other proponents regarding Agency 34?
Good afternoon. I'm the one put on the hot seat. My name is Deborah Dragos. That's spelled DEBRADRAGOS. And my department coordinates the Nebraska Overdrive Libraries Consortium. And I also work with the Nebraska e-reads funding. I want to follow up with one thing, the question about the number of people coming into the library decreasing. As Director Wagner said, that is correct. But actually, a number of libraries have seen an increase in the number of library cards because people who never came in to use the physical library now want to download the digital materials. Okay. As far as the ebooks and audiobooks that we get through Overdrive, Overdrive is the biggest company that provides these kinds of materials to libraries. The other vendors don't have platforms that are as flexible, I guess you would say, and a number of them have gone out of business. So Overdrive basically is the big guy as far as libraries and digital materials. The prices and lending models for ebooks and audiobooks vary. If we wanted to purchase, for example, the latest Stephen King audiobook, one copy is $129. And of course, with the consortium having almost 700,000 people who could likely be patrons, we'd have to buy multiple copies, okay? And as I mentioned, lending models, each publisher has its own lending model restrictions. So that $129 copy we get for 2 years, and then it expires and goes away. And if patrons want it, it has to be purchased again, okay? I looked up today just really quickly as an example, because some items we can keep forever and are a fairly reasonable price. But the big publishers, Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, they don't allow us to keep most items forever, okay? So currently the hot book out there is Spare by Prince Harry, okay? For the consortium right now, there are 354 holds on the audiobook and 209 on the holds. In Omaha, there are 632 holds on the audiobook, 374 on the ebook. So Lincoln is similar. So at this point in time, between Omaha, Lincoln, and the consortium, we've spent over $12,000 on copies for that one title. And some of those people will still have to wait 4 to 5 months or possibly longer to get a copy. The publishers do not give us a discount for buying, and it doesn't matter what vendor you would go to. A public library, a higher price now for digital. For physical items, publishers used to give us a discount. But for digital, they say you're cutting into our market, so they charge us more. So some things disappear in 12 months, some disappear in 2 years, some disappear after 26 checkouts. Some we can keep forever. It just varies.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Are there other proponents for Agency 34 Library Commission? Are there any opponents on Agency 34? Seeing none, anyone in the neutral capacity? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing on Agency 34. We will move to Agency 47, Nebraska Educational Telecommunications Commission. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Clements and members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Mark Leonard, M-A-R-K-L-E-O-N-A-R-D, and I'm the General Manager of Nebraska Public Media. I'm here today testifying on behalf of the Nebraska Educational Telecommunications Commission. We appreciate the opportunity to explain the details of our funding requests and their importance to our work, preserving history, telling stories, sustaining cultures, and making connections across the state. You've already received our budget request with a detailed narrative. I will offer some additional background on our capital funding requests that were developed as part of our 5-year technical planning. Many of these projects span multiple fiscal years and can be confusing. The Nebraska Telecommunications Commission operates a 12-tower network of television and radio transmitters across the state and many additional lower-powered translator sites. Broadcast regulations from the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, govern many aspects of operation for these sites for technical, public safety, and homeland security reasons. In addition to transmitters, the FCC also regulates frequency assignments and technical standards. We are responsible for operating and maintaining these facilities within the very specific rules from the FCC. With a dozen full-power transmitters, considerable ongoing maintenance and upgrades must be planned years in advance to ensure compliance. We're looking ahead and requesting funding for equipment, anticipating our needs that will ensure our compliance with FCC regulations. Technical advancements have continued at an increasing rate, often making previous equipment obsolete. A critical component in our broadcast production center is the routing switcher. This device is essentially the central nervous system in the facility, directing and switching all of the video and audio signals. As we have added additional channels to our broadcast signal, now standing at 5 television channels, and our on-demand streaming capacity of 12 streams, plus all editing and production streams, our system experiences a large volume of signal switching. Our operations center on 33rd Street has one of these routers, but there's also one on our remote production truck that is necessary for productions in the field. As with most things in broadcasting, the switching technology has now advanced to a digital architecture relying on packets of data called Internet Protocol, or IP. The capacity and flexibility of the routers has significantly expanded, and new designs have rapidly displaced the previous serial digital switching architecture prior systems. For Nebraska Public Media, the challenge has been finding the right time and adequate funding to accomplish the whole-scale replacement and upgrade of our 2 switching networks. The existing router on the remote truck is out of the manufacturer's technical support, and there are no replacement parts available. This represents a very vulnerable single point of failure for the remote production truck, which does most of its work in a live production environment with no easy workarounds available. To ensure complete compatibility between the router on the truck and the house router in the operations center, and to take advantage of collective buying power, it is advisable to purchase both systems from the same equipment manufacturer. It is necessary each year to block out a 3-month window in our production schedule to accomplish any upgrades of the remote truck. With the remote truck in service continually producing live, local, and sports broadcasts throughout the year, this would not be achievable. Instead, we are proposing to purchase a replacement trailer chassis for the current 19-year-old truck, which will allow us to begin the build of the routing switcher without taking the current truck out of service. It will be designed with upgraded air conditioning and a revised production layout that better serves the demands of live television production. It is anticipated that the used trailer can be sold to recoup some of the upgrading expenses. 2 of our requests would allow this transition and upgrade to begin. We have been conservative in our budget request and intend to cover any additional expenses from within Nebraska Public Media's funding. Our next request is for the ongoing replacement of obsolete or inoperative tower lighting systems across our network of transmission sites. LED lighting has completely replaced the strobe lighting systems used previously, and it has a much longer lifespan than its predecessors. The FCC takes tower lighting compliance very seriously, as towers present a severe threat to aircraft if their lighting systems are inoperative. Towers are of different heights, and the price for lighting replacement is proportional to the height of the tower. In our case, that ranges from 338 feet to our tallest tower at over 1,500 feet. Funding for this item would address lighting upgrades at KPNE North Platte and KCNE Shadron, and will be completed in FY 2025. With the completion of lighting at KPNE and KCNE and already funded KLNE Lexington, the lighting upgrades will be complete for the entire Nebraska Public Media Transmitter network, and we will be in compliance with FCC regulations. Radio operational needs are addressed in our request for radio automation and audio refresh project. Nebraska Public Media must address the reliability of the emergency alert system, the primary notification network for all television and radio broadcasters throughout the state. This has become an area of increased concern for the FCC, required to thwart the cybersecurity threat. Because we feed all 9 of our radio transmitters in a hub and spoke arrangement from our operations center in Lincoln, there is the possibility of a single point of failure in transmitting these warning alerts. A redesigned signal distribution plan will allow each transmitter to receive its own discrete alerting signal path, greatly enhancing reliability and providing more localized alerting in future emergencies. This upgraded design will require a renovation of our current radio studio facility, which is significantly overdue. The project would begin in late 2024 with funding requested for FY 2025. Moving on to items under the operating funds, several requests were included in the governor's recommended budget, but not in the Appropriation Committee's recommendations. One was the request for funding for new radio sites to provide for additional operating costs at the 4 new transmitter locations, and they are in McCook, Broken Bow, Falls City, and Columbus. Nebraska Public Media applied for and received FCC approval for the additional licenses to fill in coverage areas that our FM network was not reaching. The operating funds that were requested were to cover the electricity costs for all 4 sites and tower lease payments for 2 of the locations. Funding this request will be a recurring operating expense for the 4 new stations and will allow us to provide more Nebraskans access to our FM radio signal. Other items not recommended for funding were radio equipment replacement funds, TV equipment replacement funds, and production services funds. The equipment replacement funding for radio and television reflects the sharp increase in equipment pricing in both radio and television, as well as shorter life cycles for equipment replacement. Replacement is essential for the reliability of service and to remain current with evolving technology. The TV Production Services Fund reflects an increased use of contracted employees due to difficulties in recruiting and retaining staff members over the past year. It is part of our strategic efforts to recruit and retain qualified staff members for these positions. There was only one item in our operating budget requested that was not included in the governor's or Appropriation Committee budget recommendations. Item TV1, the addition of 1 educational specialist full-time position. During the pandemic, Nebraska Public Media began strengthening its educational services to address the severe educational challenges that our school-age students were experiencing. In addition to providing our over-the-air and streaming children's programming, we began researching the potential of educational data casting using the technology of next-generation television, as well as greater outreach to schools throughout the state. Providing funding for this additional position will help us accelerate our work to close the learning gap that has occurred. It will also allow us to produce more educational content focusing on topics specific to Nebraska's needs. With this additional position, Nebraska Public Media will have 4 employees devoted solely to supporting the educational needs of our communities. Lastly, we appreciate the recommendation to fund all 3 of our requests, our deficit funding requests, for 3 construction projects, as these are urgent and time-sensitive upgrades. Thank you for your consideration of our requests today. Joining me here are our Chief Technology Officer, Ling Ling Sun, and our Chief Financial Officer, Randy Hansen, both behind me. We would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Dorn?
Thank you, Senator Clemens. I think one of the last things you mentioned here was the tower upgrades. At least in the preliminary discussion we had, or preliminary information we had, it was that the tower, the lights weren't even working on.
When they fail, we have to file a notice to airmen with the FCC and the FAA.
Okay.
And so we have filed those while we attempt to replace those. We cannot have them on an ongoing basis. And so with the increased failure of the strobe systems, this is taking them out of service.
So there is a way to still have a tower there.
Well, and when they're not working, we put it in the NOTAM, and then that's distributed to all aircraft. So we do go periods where we are out of lighting for periods of time.
Thank you for the explanation.
Yep.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And invite next proponent for Agency 47. Seeing none, Are there any opponents on agency 47? Seeing none, anyone in the neutral capacity? Seeing none, that concludes. Do we have any letters? No. Seeing none, that concludes the hearing for agency 47. And we will thank you, and we'll open the hearing for agency 75, Nebraska Investment Council. Welcome, Director.
Thank you. Chairman Clemens and members of the Appropriation Committee. My name is Michael Walden Newman. That's Michael. Last name is Walden hyphen capital Newman. My title is State Investment Officer, and what that means is I'm the director at the Nebraska Investment Council, which is the agency set up in 1969 to centralize the investment of all public funds in Nebraska. And Mr. Bivin, I made a presentation at the Retirement Committee, which is really our oversight committee at the Legislature. And Mr. Bivin suggested that I bring it and that you all might be interested in a short overview of the agency. Does that still sound like a good idea? Okay, terrific. Won't take a lot of time. I've brought you charts from our quarterly investment report that runs 250 pages. So when you have more time, you're welcome to come across the street and have lunch with me. I have a sack lunch by myself every day, and I'm always looking for company, and we can go through it bit by bit. But very quickly, as I said, we're the investment agency, and you can see the list of programs on page 1. So we have over 32 separate investment programs. We work with a lot of investment managers, over 60 firms, and there are 150 separate investments across our portfolios. About half of them are retirement funds, but we also manage the state trusts. You had state lands up here. So the trusts, some were set up at statehood. We manage the assets for those trusts. We manage the state's checkbook, which I don't need to tell this committee how that has grown, particularly in recent years, into the billions. Is at $7-8 billion now. And we manage that in-house. And that checkbook, unlike my checkbook at home, that checkbook has 800 line items in it, representing all of the funds held by all state agencies. We commingle those together and invest them, and I'll explain how we invest the differences between the investment allocation for the pension funds versus the trust funds versus the state checkbook, because they each have different needs, so we invest them accordingly and differently. The structure of the agency, the council is as a separate agency. I'm the agency head, but everybody has a boss, and I have 8 that serve as the board of directors for the council. 5 of those 8 are named by the governor, and they serve a 5-year term on a rotating basis. So these are business people from Nebraska. The other 3 positions are statutory positions, non-voting members: the state treasurer, the director of the pension system, and the administrator of the Omaha pension system, because I think some of you here know that 5-6 years ago now, the legislature asked us to take over the management of the Omaha school pension system, and because of, frankly, the investment program was in trouble. So we did, And as you know, and you'll hear, they're going to, the state system will take over the administration of that program by 2024. So we have a small staff, flat staff, and a busy staff. On page 2, you see the growth in the assets. And it is a combination of the growth in deposits into these funds and also the markets that all of us enjoyed until this year. They've doubled since I've been here. I've been at the Investment Council. This is my 9th year, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. I came here after doing this job for the state of Wyoming in the state treasurer's office, managing their permanent funds, which are coal, oil, and gas money that had built up. When I left 9 years ago, they'd grown in the 10 years I'd been there from $5 billion to 18 billion. Our assets have doubled and then pulled back a little bit with the decline in values this year that all of us know personally. I talked about the asset allocation, and the asset allocation, or the mix of stocks and bonds, has been shown to be to determine the return on funds, to account for 90% of the return on funds. So we spend a lot of time deciding the asset allocation, the mix of stocks and bonds, and then the types of stocks and types of bonds within each of those broad categories to put together the portfolio. And then we go out and hire the best-in-class managers to implement the allocation. But by the time you get to that manager choice, we've done the heavy lifting, which is deciding just how much should go into these various asset allocations. And you see, for the pension funds, they have, as I tell people, it's not for, let's pick teachers. We're not investing for the retirees. And we're not investing for the teachers. And we're not investing for kids in school who may want to be teachers. We're investing this portfolio for the teachers who aren't even born yet. So the time horizon is literally infinite. So to protect that fund and grow that fund, we need a high allocation to stocks to protect against inflation and growth. But we keep a 30% allocation to bonds to provide normally some comfort in the sleep well test. And all of us have learned this year, it's one of the few times in history where stocks and bonds have moved the same direction and it hasn't been up. But still, that is the allocation. Then we have within the equity allocation, there are public stocks that make up 57% of the stock equity allocation. But we also have private investments, private equity, and private real estate. And when I say real estate, which is 7.5%, and private equity is 5%, we're not buying land. We're investing in real estate funds with other institutional investors that do a myriad of things, from bare land to the modification of buildings to constructing buildings, et cetera. So that's what we mean by real estate. Then when you look at the trusts in Nebraska, we invest in a 50-50 allocation of stocks and bonds. We try to mirror the stock allocation to the pensions, but it's 50% stocks and 50% bonds, so that the bonds can provide the yield that those trusts need and live on. There are several different trusts. The largest is the trust for the state education grants, makes up the majority of this general endowment or trust of commingled trusts and endowments. And you see there we have, as I said, 50% stocks, mirroring the stock allocation, and 50% fixed income. Then for the state's checkbook, the checkbook's the checkbook. It's not savings, just like home. And so we invest that in-house in what I call cash and extended cash. So cash, 15% of us in cash, overnight cash. And we're in touch with the treasurer's office every day to move money out of that overnight allocation to pay the coming day's bills. So that's a daily activity that we carry out in the office. And then the 85%, we invest in essentially fixed income, but bonds, and we can go out up to 10 years, but the average of the bond mix is about a 5-year. So that brings a little bit extra yield to the portfolio then. It's like having a yield on your checking account, but it's very liquid. So you know. Once we build the allocation of the asset classes, what we need to do is turn the markets into money. So we've built the allocation and try to get then the return out of it that we need to make state needs. And on page 4, you see the return, and the page numbers are at the upper right-hand corner in red. On page 4, you see the return assumptions for each of the asset classes that we have in the portfolio. You see the return assumption, and then you see what is the standard deviation. And what that means is the risk of that return assumption occurring. And so that 2/3 of the time, when you see the standard deviation, we expect that 2/3 of the time over a 10-year period, the return on stocks is going to be the projected return, in this case of US stocks of a little over 7%, plus or minus 17%. So you can add 17% to that in a good year, and you take it away in a bad year. And sometimes it can be more, because we're just hoping that 2/3 of the time it will be within there. The same is for the 30-year, although 30-year, I don't pay a lot of attention to the 30-year assumption. That's a long way out. And so when you simply add the weights of the allocation by class with the return you expect to get and roll them together, that's how you get our expected return. In this case, we're showing for the retirement programs, the expected return in this case of 7% on average over a year. Now this year, that's not happening, but that's our expectation. It's that simple. That's how we turn the markets into money. When you look now, though, on what's really happening, we'll do the current year first and then turn to a better year in just last year. So you see the current year performance, and these are numbers through September 30th. You see what all of us have experienced, and that is the downturn in the market. But when you look underneath, the good news is that we've beaten the benchmarks for the portfolios. In other words, we have index investments for US stocks and non-US stocks. We simply buy the index and we can get it cheap for really next to nothing from our asset managers. We buy the broad market. We have the allocation to global equities that you saw. Global equities means we hire managers who can buy US stocks and non-US stocks. They literally can buy across the global market. Those are the active managers that we hire. We have 4 of them, and we pay them more than we pay the index managers. And those, in this case, those global managers who have chosen non-US or US are what have brought our returns above what we would have gotten if we had everything invested passively, if we had just bought. So the short version of that story is that we got what we paid for, and that is better than index returns by hiring good managers who are stock pickers. So you see there the returns, and so just to end on a happier note, and if you turn to the last page, last year, incredibly, we had the best returns that the Investment Council has ever had in its portfolios. So not only did we have the 10-year run-up in returns that all of us had that have money set aside, but for the Investment Council, it really, and to measure it, it really was the best year. And that translates into, for some pensioners, teachers, judges, and highway patrol. Those pensioners are indifferent to the market. Their investment is guaranteed to them by years of a formula that is simply years of service times their pay. For the state employees, however, and the county employees who are commingled, all the assets are commingled for investment. For them, what that can translate into is a dividend on top of the guarantee of return, which is 5% for the state and county retirement plan. There's a guarantee for that of a floor, but in good years, it can be higher than that, and they enjoyed a nice dividend on top. And you see there again, we build not only at good returns, but we beat our benchmarks, and that's what you want us to do. You want us to be able to do better than just simply passively invest the funds. So that's a quick version of a story that we live every day and that I've enjoyed, and happy to answer any questions on the investment program. And then I'm here with my hand out, and I'm just going to say it straight up. So we can talk about that now, or we can talk about it later, all at once, whatever you like.
Well, committee, do you have any questions? Committee? Senator Dover.
I have two questions. One is, so you talked about that you have, excuse me, council members on a rotating basis. Can you
Yes.
describe how that works?
Yes, so the council members are like me. I was offered the job, and then it was pending legislative confirmation, governor's okay, and legislative confirmation. The council members are the same. So they're appointed by the governor, and then they go through legislative confirmation. So the 5 board members are on staggered terms. So every year, one of them is up for either reappointment and reconfirmation, or we have a new board member.
Can he be reappointed
We have board members who've served 20 years more on the council. And then we have a new board member who's coming on board this year. Most have spent time on the council.
All right, then, so would you address your request that you mentioned?
Right.
Oh, I have one last question.
Oh, all
Sure.
right.
My second question was, how are the benchmarks determined? You talk about the policy benchmark.
Correct. So the boards, those are set in our investment policy. So just to back up a bit, so the role of the board is to set the investment policies, and we have an investment policy for every type of investment. The endowments have an investment policy, the retirement programs have an investment policy, and so forth. The board sets the policy. The board hires me, and the board hires and fires the investment managers. In a lot of programs, that's delegated to staff. Here it's not, and when I came, I happened to like that, and I didn't seek to change that. So that's the role of the board, and the benchmarks for each of the asset classes are set inside of the investment policy, and we arrive at the benchmark ourselves through staff and board discussion, and also we, as a bit of a segue to the handout request, we employ an investment consultant, one of the largest in the business, to help us vet managers and also decide on the appropriate benchmark for each of the asset classes.
And that benchmark represents then?
The benchmarks represent the passive investment for that asset class.
Senator Erdman?
Thank you, Senator Clements. Can you speak a bit about, we have several bills dealing with ESG. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator, I can. I was here till 6:45 last night, waiting for you. This wasn't the hearing you all had, but banking did. And the bill I spoke to was the last of 8. This is what's happening for us as the investment council. ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, is an acronym for investing based on either either of those three issues, right? And there's always been that kind of investing. I'm old enough to remember. It's become activist, though, recently. There have always been opportunities to invest funds based on your conscience, be it your religion, your beliefs, societal beliefs. I remember clearly apartheid and divestment movements for South Africa back in the day in the 80s and late 70s. What's happened in the last couple of years is it's really ramped up and it's become a hot issue. And it was helped along by, I'm just going to be honest with you, it got hot by the head of an investment firm writing a letter about climate change to the corporate world. It wasn't corporate America, it was the world. And I call it the Fink letter because Larry Fink is the name of the head of BlackRock. And when he wrote that letter, it got the attention of people who'd never paid attention to this issue. And it sure got our attention because BlackRock invests a lot of our money. And what we saw in the letter didn't sit well with my board and me. And so we began studying last year this ESG issue in a way we'd never paid attention before. We thought about our relationship with our managers, and we thought about proxy voting and what it means, because the Investment Council applies the same practice as most institutional investors, and that is we let our managers vote our proxies. In other words, the proxy is when the corporation decides to make some decision at the board level, they send out notices to shareholders and say, how do you want to vote on this issue? There are hundreds of thousands of votes taken, and we cede those to our managers to vote our proxies in the interest of our funds, right? Well, now there is a call to divest of funds that promote environmental, social, or governance investing, environmental, social, or government goals. And it's coming from some states and not others. And the country's divided, red and blue, for the most part, on this issue. So here we are, wondering, what should the council do about this? And what is, as I say, the real question that we should be considering? So we had BlackRock out last July and asked them, what's up with this? And then we just had a council meeting. The council meets 6 times a year, and we devote July and February meetings to education sessions for the council. Well, the February meeting was February 9th, and we had BlackRock out and we had Vanguard out, both of which are firms who've been in the news over their ESG stands, and taken to task by states like Nebraska. And when I say by states, I mean the attorneys general of these states who have written directly to the firms attesting that in their minds, these firms are not serving the interests of their respective states well. We also had a firm that helps develop the guidelines for proxy votes used by investment firms. This one happens to be, there are 2 big ones, ISS, which stands for Institutional Shareholder Services, has 2/3 of the business, and another, Glass Lewis, that has 1/3. And they develop the criteria, the filters used by corporations to vote proxies. So we had them out, and they've been taken to task, most recently by attorneys general, including ours. So here they sat in front of our board so that we could really understand it, because the Investment Council is protected in law from the ESG question. And there was a bill 743 that Senator Kauth put out on the last day of Bill, I call it dropping this, the word escapes me. Right. So that specifically to your question, and last night, that bill drops on the last day of bill introduction. And I thought, you know what, I bet you they're gonna ask the Investment Council for a fiscal note on this bill. I'm not sure, but I'm thinking because we've got all the money. And so I went the next day to Senator Kauth's office and I said, you know, I think I'm gonna get a fiscal note request on this, and can you put me in touch with whoever drafted this bill? And they, sure enough, the next day I got the note from the fiscal office saying, you know, we'd like you to comment on this. And I wrote back, and they give you 5 days to comment. So I wrote back the truth and I said, I'm not gonna have time to comment on that, to quantify the fiscal impact of this bill on us. So I just said that and I sent back in the fiscal note. Later, I heard from Senator Kauth and Senator Slama's office. I talked to their office as well. And through their staff's help, I was able to find the source of the bill, which was the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. had developed the model legislation for LB 743. So I called and emailed the Heritage Foundation, but frankly, they're not going to write back to me. I knew it, but you never know. And so at last night's hearing, I said again, you know, we're trying to wrap our arms around this. We have laws, 2 laws that we think protect us and the state of Nebraska from getting involved in this. There's the law that makes us fiduciaries. Under the law, I'm a fiduciary, and the 5 voting members of the council are fiduciaries. And as fiduciaries, it's very plain in Nebraska statute that our responsibility as investors of these funds is to invest them in the sole interest of the beneficiaries of the funds, but also or I should say, the general taxpayers of 2 million Nebraskans. Because after all of the money is public money. Public money pays my salary directly, and therefore pays when I contribute to my retirement. That's public funds. When the state matches my contribution, that's public funds. And that extends through state and local government, right? So we have the fiduciary rule we follow. There's also an important statute that says that the Investment Council, am I going on too long on this? Okay.
We'd like to have you wrap it up, yes.
Yeah, is that there's a law that says that the Investment Council will make no investment if it's primarily for a social cause. That's on the books, and we've used that to stay focused on our responsibility, which is to invest and see the financial materiality, or as I say, the financial so what test. That's what we're here to do, not the social materiality of an investment. That's not our job. So we believe that we're already protected, that Nebraska's laws already protect us from this discussion. So what I said last night to wrap it up is, you know, this seems like a big deal. There were a lot of people talking about this last night, a lot of testifiers, and I testified neutral because I just think I'm a state agency. I'm not there to take a stand on that. I work for you all. But I did say that I think that this is probably important enough, rather than take action this session, that probably everybody wants to take a good look at this. You've got a legislative research staff. Have a good look. We're not going to have any decisions at the Investment Council before you go home anyway. We're glad to work with you. We're going to come to some resolution on what we need to do, particularly taking back proxy voting ourselves and vote them in a neutral way if we believe that these firms are voting in a way that
All
isn't.
right, Senator Lippincott, do you have a question?
Yes, sir, I do.
Yes.
When you buy a stock or a mutual fund, you get a prospectus, so you know exactly what you're invested in.
Mhm.
Do you have anything published like that for where you're spending the pie?
We can get them. Right. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Walden Newman. Oh, excuse me,
I do have a question. Yes.
Senator Wishart.
So thank you so much, Director, for being here. One of the requests that your office brought to us was for recruitment and transition of a new state investment officer.
Right.
Can you walk us through that process? It's a very big deal
Right.
to fill your shoes and move forward in making sure that we're investing these dollars well for taxpayers.
Yes. Thank you very much, Senator. So I'm retiring. I've been here 9 years, and I'll be leaving at the end of this year. I'll be 70 come summer, and I'm going to spend what time I have left holding my wife's hand. The good news is the blessing of this job hasn't been that it's been a great job, but we also found where we're going to spend the rest of our life, and it's right here in Nebraska, and we're not from here. The kids have grown up and left us. They're not here. We don't know a lot of people, but we're going to stay here. So they need to find a new me. That will happen the end of December. And so what we want to do is rehire the headhunter, the firm that found me in 2014 and my predecessor in 2010. And that costs some money. The fee for that, it's a good firm and they're giving us a good rate because we're repeat clients. But the fee for that is a third of the SIO's salary. And I make $325,000, Senators. It's a good paying job. It pays a lot of money. It pays less. My pay is less than average, but still, we're going to try to pay a little bit more. Probably for me, they're going to have to pay more for my successor. But that's the starting point plus expenses. And what we'd like to do is start now so that we have somebody signed by November and they can start when I leave, that there'll be a smooth transition and they'll start January of 2024. We've had to have interim directors in the past, and we don't want to do that. Like most state employees, my payout, that's all part of it. The payout's going to be the equivalent of 3 months' salary. When you have long-term employees in state government, my employees, the average payout, it's 3 months of salary. You can leave it vacant, which is what agencies do to make up for that, right? The lack of PSL. But the board, they don't want to do that for me. So that's why the request was there for 40, it's going to be $50,000+ for that PSL payout because we haven't been able to vacation COVID like we'd intended. It's that simple. And the headhunter, the recruitment firm is really critical. Otherwise, you'd be left having to do it ourselves, and we're not equipped to handle a nationwide search for that. And the other part is too our consulting expenses for Aon, the investment consultant. Those too are going up just with inflation, and that was part of the request. So for other agencies that are bigger, my payout you can take from vacant positions. We don't have any. You can also in an emergency borrow from operations to pay the payout of a retiring employee, but not when our operations budget is held tight. There's just no room in it, and I don't want to burden my successor with running out of money and having to do a budget with, a supplemental request next year. So I just put it in, and it's been 9 years. We haven't had to ask for it for other me's that may only stay 3 or 4, but that's the truth of the request.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you all very much. And I'm going to say it, thanks for the support over the years.
Thank you.
It's been terrific. It's not over yet, but it's getting close, and I mean that sincerely.
Are there any proponents for the Nebraska Investment Council agency? Seeing none, are there any opponents on the Investment Council? Seeing none, anyone here in the neutral position? Seeing none, that concludes testimony for Agency 75. We'll go to Agency 85, Public Employees Retirement System. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Good afternoon, Senator Chairman Clements and members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Randy Gerke, that's spelled R-A-N-D-Y, G-E-R-K-E, and I'm the Director of the Nebraska Public Employees Retirement Systems, Agency 85. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in front of you today. I was going to go just a little bit through what our agency does as well, and then I would attack to explain what our budget requests are this year, if that is appropriate. Agency 85 manages 6 retirement plans that are administered by the state of Nebraska. We have 145,000 plus total members that are active and inactive, as well as retired. We pay out over $72 million in monthly benefits between all the plans, and that goes to every county in the state, as well as most of the states in the union, and there are a few foreign countries that some of our thank you, but our payments go to. Of those 6 retirement plans, 3 are defined benefit plans where the benefit is based on years of service and salary history. Just talk a little bit about each one of those. We have the school plan is our largest plan. The contribution rate there is for the employees, they put in 9.78%, and then the employer matches that at 101%. That plan is 98.42% funded, and that was according to the last actuarial report that we got in November, which I actually have given you a copy of for your reference for later. According to NASRA, actually, defined benefit plans on a national average are about 77% funded. And so our plans are very well funded in the state of Nebraska, and that's largely thanks to the legislature and the executive branch, as well as the Nebraska Investment Council. Thank you. I just wanted to point that out. The state patrol plan is the second defined benefit plan that we have. They contribute 16 or 17% of their employee salary, and then there's 100% employer match. They are 90.67% funded. It is of interest for you probably that they do not contribute to the Social Security plan and are not eligible. The judges is our smallest defined benefit plan. The employee rates vary by years of service, and, as well as their hire date. There is not an employee or employer match. However, there is a 5% salary match that comes from general appropriations. The judges plan is 101% funded. Very good, very well funded plan. We also have 2 defined contribution plans for the state and the county employees. The benefit is based on account balance for both. Within those plans, there are sub-plans. One of them is a true defined contribution plan, where each member contributes and then is able to make investment options. And those options are subject to market movement. This particular option was closed in 2003, so no new members. However, there are still contributing members that have been long-term employees of both the state and the county. The other sub-plan for the state and county is the cash balance hybrid plan. Members, they do not make investment options. They're guaranteed a crediting rate of 5% or the federal midterm rate plus 1.5%. And The sixth plan that we have is a volunteer plan. It's a defined compensation plan, or I'm sorry, deferred compensation plan. And that's available to state and county employees. There is no match from the state or the employer. They have the 17 investment options and are able to self-direct as they choose. The agency is governed by the Public Employees Retirement Board. There's 8 voting members, 6 are from member groups, and 2 members are at large, and then there's one ex officio member, Michael Walden Newman, who you just heard from the Nebraska Investment Council, sits on our board as a non-voting member. All are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature for 5-year terms. The agency normally has a base budget of about $6 million. However, this year we are at $10 million. We are in the middle of what we're calling the Omaha Transfer Project. We are through LB 147 a couple of years ago. It was decided that we would administer the Omaha defined benefit plan for their teachers. And we are in the process of that. The go live date is 9/1/2024. And so we are working very hard on that project right now. The agency has 58 full-time equivalent positions. Currently, we have 6 that are unfilled. One has actually been unfilled for a year. Like many state agencies, we're having trouble finding folks that want to come work for us, but we are working on that. And I think some of the things that are going on this year will help with that. Within the agency, there's several departments. We have accounting, we have member services that talk to our walk-in folks. They do office visits. They answer phone call questions all the time. We also have member benefits to do the calculations for the benefit plans. And then we have an education department that goes out throughout the state and holds seminars and educates our members on this benefit that they have, which is a very nice benefit. I'd just like to go into the budget just a little bit. We have 3 programs that we budget: Program 041, 042, and 515. 041 and 042 are both cash funded, which means, of course, that the money comes from the trust funds. And 041 pays our operating expenses for the agency. 042 pays the expenses for the PERB, and it's actually it's a small amount of money. And then 515 takes care of goes into the funding of the plans, and that is general funding money. If I could, I'd like to just talk a little bit about my requests for budget.
Yes.
Would that be fine? Okay, and program 41 primarily is what I want to speak about first. We had the administrative expenses that we asked for that were described in the budget book that included increases from accounting and purchasing, the DAS type of fees that we all have to pay. We also were asked to put in a 5% PSL increase estimate and then a 4% health insurance increase estimate, which we did. The first issue that was specific to our agency, though, was we put in a reduction for our programming costs, and this is because of the Omaha project. By the second year of the coming biennium, that project should be finished. The programming will be done. That was intended to be a one-time cost, and so we reduced our budget back from that little over 10 back to right around 6. I did want to talk a little bit about we put in for some IT issues. We conducted a tech assessment in 2021 and 2022. And from that, we were given spending authority to conduct this and to see where, if our computer system is, first implemented in 2003, is it feasible to keep this going? Do we need to look for a new one? Whatever. We felt like it actually has a lot of useful life, and that's what the tech assessment did come back with that recommendation. However, they recommended that we do some more things, and we are largely paper. we should, many of the type of financial places that do what we do, they have online options where the members can apply online and they can, they can just do all kinds of interaction. We don't do that. We've got a lot of paper. And so some of these issues are to move the agency forward and make it more modern, let's say. But they also are to make it secure, because we don't want to move ahead without the security. So in 2023 and 2024, the first thing that we really need to do in order to move any of it forward is to do an identity proofing for self-service. And the amount requested for that first year was $456,855. It also included a little bit of IT training. Because our agency, the IT folks, we partner with the OCIO. We have a manager and 3 programmers that actually are OCIO employees. Then we also have some FTE that are our employees. But we maintain most of our system on the day-to-day type of things. And so, but we need to train those folks on what to do, how to maintain this new stuff that we'd like to implement. We do think that doing some of these things is going to extend our useful life, or we think we'll be able to use our legacy system probably 10 years more into the future, maybe more. There's nothing wrong with it. It works great. And we did do kind of a down and dirty to find out what a new system might cost. And the figure that we were getting back was between $40 and $50 million and take about 3 to 4 years to implement. And so we thought that this would be actually the most conservative and smart way to go, is to upgrade our system. The second year, 2024, we asked for $1.9 million, almost $2 million, let's say. And that was to actually implement online member service enhancements so they can apply online and they can conduct business and they can do it securely. We also asked for retirement process improvements, which we separate that because that is actually for our employers. Our employers submit us data and contributions, and a lot of it's done through email and that type of way. It could be done better and more electronic. However, we want to do it securely, and so that was one of the things that we asked for. We also there's middleware. I'm not a huge tech person, so if I'm stammering a little bit, I apologize. But we need to do a middleware update, and what that is there's software that runs on IBM WebSphere application server, and in 2030, that software or the application server will end support, and so it's now time to start thinking about that change. And so we asked for that to begin in the second year of the biennium. Also, IT training to operate these things. The next thing that I guess I would like to discuss, and probably the question that's going to come up, is the director increase in net salary. And that is not for me. I am also retiring this spring. I will be retiring as of June 2nd. And so that's not for me, but that is for the next person to keep this job competitive. And so we asked for 50,000 plus an increase in retirement, the associated increase in retirement in FICA for that first year, and then 60,000 in the second. And then we also asked for a director search of $50,000. There is a search going on right now, I will just say, and it is, they have not employed a search company at this point. They are doing it through several means: DAS, NCTR, which is the teachers' retirement system, NASRA, which is the state retirement administrators. They are advertising through there and seeing what they can get, and hopefully they will get qualified applicants. but that's going on right now. And so when this process all went on, back in last summer, I had told them I will be retiring. And so they said, put the 50,000 in. Program 42, we asked for no additions at all. That program actually is only budgeted at 38,112, and that should be sufficient. And then program 515, which of course is a big ticket item, and we appreciate the funding that you have given us in the past for that. We did ask for 60 million, almost 61 million for the first year and 63 million the second. One thing to note about that, we are a pass-through for Omaha, the Omaha Public School System, which it is not under our wing quite yet. We have been the pass-through for several years since I've been here. And so of that 60 million, nearly 10 is actually just, we pass that through to Omaha. With that, I'd be happy to stop and answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Alvarez?
Hi, thank you, Senator Clements. Thanks for being here. I wanted to get back to the upgrade of the technology assessment. So you want to do an online portal so people have access to their retirement accounts?
We do, yes.
And you do that with paper now?
A lot of the processes are done through paper. They have to apply with paper, that kind of thing. We want to be able to do that online.
Is there no online portal they can go to now?
They have it. They're able to go into an account, but they can't really conduct any business. They can see their account. They can see their beneficiaries. It needs improvement.
So what exactly would the first year cover compared to the second year?
The first year would cover actually the groundwork, which is identity proofing for self-service. And it's a prerequisite. I do have my IT person here. If I'm afraid I can't be specific on that. I'm not sure that I know.
Okay, yeah, I probably want to ask them questions of what these 2 years would entail.
Okay.
And what kind of security you expect to put on that after it is up,
Mm-hmm.
and ongoing expenses.
Sure.
For online and security.
I will tell you, we take security very, very seriously there. They say that it's not when you're going to get hacked. I mean, it's not if you're going to get hacked, it's when. And so far, we've been very lucky, and but we guard against it. It's one of those things that I lose sleep over.
Okay, so do you know if you already have security platforms in place, or you're going to need to increase and enhance that security?
We're enhancing. We do have things in place. Oh, definitely.
Any other committee questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Gerke. Would you bring your IT person up for comments? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jack Hardy, Jackhary, and I'm the IT manager for the retirement systems.
All right, Senator Armendariz, you have a question?
Yeah, so have you already picked somebody to do this upgrade, and will it be cloud-based or on our own servers, or?
The pension system is on our own servers. It runs on the state IT infrastructure. So the middleware realignment could ultimately end up with cloud deployment with middleware. That hasn't been determined yet. We don't have a vendor selected for this. That would be done through a competitive bid process.
So how do you know that price?
That's an estimate based on a technology assessment that we had done.
By an outside company?
Yes.
Does that outside company sell this product?
Sell which product?
This upgrade? Are they a third-party vendor of selling products?
They don't sell software per se. They're a consulting company in the public pension system space.
Okay.
So they're not a seller of.
Do you know where they got their numbers?
Well, they came in, we actually, through a competitive process, we got bids from vendors to come in and do a technology assessment. And they were selected from that. And then they came in and they did a kind of a deep dive into our system, did a evaluation of the different functional areas, and they created that estimate.
Okay, so we don't really know how much it'll be. My hesitancy is if, once we approve something, vendors know how much money they have. So I prefer that we don't approve a dollar amount that we're not sure and have gone back several times to negotiate down to get best price before we make it public of how much a vendor could potentially get. I mean, you might be able to spend $600,000 on a $2 million spend, right? So it's going to be my every effort to make sure that we get competitive bids before we go ahead and approve dollar amounts with no knowledge of how much the actual cost will be.
Yeah, the assumption going into it all along would be there would be a competitive bidding process.
Okay, so would you agree that we should hold off on publicizing a dollar amount?
Well, I guess I don't know much about the budget process and what gets published and what doesn't, but I guess this was the means we thought we could do to achieve getting the money for a project, but I'm not sure how else you would do it.
Okay.
Sorry,
so
I'm
maybe
just
we
not
can
my
do it-
area of
Maybe we
expertise.
can do it this way,
Yeah.
this way. And then do you anticipate it? Well, if you don't know, if just the consultant has given you this amount, you probably don't know the details of this spend then. The security and ongoing expense year over year of what that might be to maintain this upgrade.
No, but we maintain a team that currently successfully maintains our pension administration system. So the assumption would be that that team would continue to do so. So these are upgrades or software changes for an existing system that we maintain. So
Are there licensing costs? Are there costs to
We don't-
a
we,
security company to keep it secure?
I don't anticipate any of that. I mean, we don't pay licensing fees for our pension system. It's wholly owned by the state. So we don't currently have licensing fees for that. This is a modification to a system that we already own as a state. So there's no vendor that we pay licensing fees for our pension administration system now.
So you're anticipating the $2 million is for consulting fees to do the upgrade?
For development work.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to, I mean, for all the IT professionals that are needed to make the changes to the software,
So it's basically to pay people to do the upgrade.
to do the work, that's correct.
There's no actual software purchasing that you're doing.
I don't want to say there wouldn't be any. There might be some software licenses that we have to buy, but you're not buying a system per se. You're really paying for IT professionals to make changes to an existing system.
Okay. All right.
All right, any other questions?
I do for the director.
Pardon?
I do for the director.
Oh, all right. Thank you, sir. Director Durkee, would you come back for a question?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
I'm going to ask you a question I'm not too sure about, but I talked to Senator Calderman when he was in chaired retirement, and I don't know if it involves your department, but there were some questions as far as funding. He was working through last year. Do you have any idea what that would pertain to? And if not, that's okay. I just was wondering if you could talk. He said there was a problem with retirement and funding. I don't know if that would have to do with this agency or not.
I don't know that he, I think he's concerned, maybe his concern might have been, the plans are very well funded and they're funded through contributions by the employee, or the investment gains and losses, and then by the Appropriations Committee. I think maybe what he might have been concerned with was that that 2% of salary for schools maybe might, I don't know if that's what his concern was or not, if there was some concern there, but the plans are very well funded.
Okay, all right. I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you.
Could I say one more thing?
Yes.
If it would be helpful, I think we could probably get you at least the public piece of that tech assessment. If that would be helpful. There was a range for those costs, and we felt like we had to, for the budget, we had to put in a cost, to get some sort of a recommendation. So if that would be helpful, we can certainly get you more information. Okay.
Any other questions for Director Gerke? Senator Dover?
You want to express what you just said?
Well, no, I think you talked just a brief minute about it, is the situation with the Omaha teachers retirement and how that was brought in and how the state has basically, and I think somebody else talked about it too, the funding part of that and where that's all going and stuff, so.
And how well was that funded?
I believe that plan is only funded at about 63%. Yeah, it's not nearly as well funded. They had some investment problems. The Nebraska Investment Council is working very hard to get that changed. But yeah. So
Is that why they asked for this agency to take that over?
I believe so. There was they got some bad press, if you remember, in the Omaha World Herald a few years ago, where it was, if you Google how to wreck a public pension plan, you'll find many, many articles that were written about them. And I think that's what started the conversation.
How do they go from 63% to where they need to be then?
Well, I mean, it's not going to happen because they're going to save so much money with us. That's true. But, I think that they do hearings on that right now to the retirement committee. I think they are on track to eventually be better funded.
I can speak to that. I'll just speak to that,
Great.
Senator,
Wonderful.
for the committee. There are three of us on the committee that are on the Retirement Systems Committee. And even though they're not state plans, we bring in every pension plan that is less than 80% funded is required to come to the legislature, to our retirement committee, and report how they're doing. The Omaha Teachers Plan has come before us, and the current superintendent has been, the last 3 years, prioritizing their contributions. I believe it's about $24 million extra out of their budget every year. They're adding over a 20-year period to catch up to 100%. They use an actuarial required contribution. They're, in years past, they skipped paying those, but they've been prioritizing that lately. And so that it's not a liability of the state, but it is a concern for state retirees, state citizens, that we do monitor those.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Seeing none? Thank you,
Thank
Director
you for your
Gerke.
time.
Are there any other proponents for the public retirement system? Are there any? Seeing none, are there any opponents regarding the retirement system? Seeing none, anyone in the neutral capacity? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing for Agency 85. And I have a prior commitment. I'm going to have to be leaving. And I'm going to turn things over to Vice Chair Wisher.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, we will open the hearing for Agency 41. Do we have anybody, a director here? Great. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairperson Wisher and members of the Appropriations Committee. For the record, my name is Greg Lemon, G-R-E-G-L-E-M-O-N. I am the Director of the Nebraska Real Estate Commission. I'll tell you just a brief little story about myself before we get started. My first job was as a legislative fiscal analyst in the Legislative Fiscal Office in 1986. So quite some time ago. A lot of things have changed since then, but one thing that doesn't seem to have changed is the Appropriations Committee is the committee that works the most in, shall we say, the least glamorous hearing room in the Capitol. So that doesn't appear to have changed any, but I want to say that I appreciate I appreciate all the work that you've done to get us this far, and appreciate the things in the preliminary recommendation. I will tell you very, very briefly about what we do. I probably won't take as long as some of the other agencies. The Nebraska Real Estate Commission licenses and regulates all of the real estate agents in the state. There are approximately 8,000 licensed real estate agents in the state of Nebraska. Like everybody else, I serve a boss. I serve the 7-member Nebraska Real Estate Commission chaired by the Secretary of State with 6 members appointed by the governor. And then getting into why we are here today, we did have something in our budget request which was not approved and which I would like to address. We have asked for a person, an additional auditor. I will give you a little bit of history. I have been the director of the commission for about 13 and a half years. When I started, we were processing a little over 400 applications a year. Granted, that was in the midst of a bit of a depression, but if you go back 10 years when we were out of that, we were processing a little over 500 license applications a year. Last year, we processed 1,300. This is the first time I am in front of the commission, or excuse me, in front of the Appropriations Committee asking for an additional person. I'm very conservative by nature. I thought maybe the increase was a blip, but the increase has gone on for 5 or 6 years and keeps growing. So our staff is spread a little thin. There's kind of a bit of a strange timing issue to all this because we had 3 trust account examiners that go out and audit the exams or audit the designated brokers. We had one of those retire. At the time, it wasn't the right time to come to the legislature and ask for additional funding. We evaluated the needs of the office. Because of the numbers I'm talking to you about, we decided we needed a front office staff person, an additional front office staff person, more than we needed to replace that trust account examiner at that time. So what we did is we basically swapped. As you probably know, agencies can't add people without additional PSL, without additional money. So we swapped the positions, got that additional staff person, because as I said, we evaluated our needs, we had additional work there, and we did that. With the thought that at some point when the timing was right, I don't know if the timing is right now or not, but we would come back to the legislature and try to get our audit staff back up to full strength. And I will tell you a little bit about what the auditors do. As I said, we normally have 3. We have only had 2. I normally don't like to sound like I'm talking things up or whatever, but I would say that the Nebraska Real Estate Commission has the best audit exam program in the country. We go out and we're proactive for most states. And what the auditors do is they go out to the designated brokers' offices where they keep the transaction files on the real estate transactions. They examine those files for compliance, for completeness, for all the disclosures that are supposed to be in there. They look at the bank accounts and the books where the client funds are accounted for. And as I said, we do that on a very proactive basis. We say we would rather educate than regulate. So we go into those offices on a regular basis. If there's any problems, if there's any issues, we identify those and we come back in a period of time and we see if they're going better. And most of the time they are. On the rare occasions when they aren't, we might have to take further action. So we are down to 2 because of that swap I talked about, and we want to get back up to our 3 trust account examiners. That is the job they do. We feel it's very important. We've had to extend the time that we're going out to examine those accounts because we have fewer people. And we also have our senior examiner is likely to retire. The junior examiner doesn't want to be a senior examiner. So we're going to have, especially since they're on the road a lot, we're going to have a little bit of a difficult issue with training people if we can't pull somebody else on board. The other thing I will add, which I should have said at the beginning, the Nebraska Real Estate Commission is entirely self-funded by cash funds. Since I started 13 years ago, we have reduced our license fees by about 20%. back. Salesperson's license fee in 2008, 2009 was $90. Today it's $70. Corresponding increase in the broker license fees. The license fees also determine the renewal fees. That's the majority of our revenue. So we have decreased fees. We would not have to increase fees to add this person. And we have the money to do this. So we're in our cash fund. We need the appropriation. So we wouldn't have to increase fees. We have the money in the cash fund. And that is basically it. We would respectfully consider, ask for your consideration of this. And the only other thing I would add is, although I haven't seen it, I believe there is a letter from the Nebraska Realtors Association in support of this as well. And I forgot to add that trust account examination program that we do, where we go out and see the brokers, they like it. I mean, not everybody likes it, but the vast majority, we get very positive comments about what we go out and do. So we want to keep doing it and doing it well.
Thank you, Director. Any questions? Senator Dover.
2 questions, I guess. One is, if you could just talk about the audit requirements of, how often you go out, who gets audited, how, based on size, they get audited more than once. And also, how are you able to keep the audits going, with COVID having to do with it, and just how are you able to keep going with this too?
Sure, absolutely. So the audit schedule, we have an audit schedule, which was when we had 3 people, basically, depending on the size of the brokerage and the level of activity, was either a 6-month schedule for the larger brokerages or brokerages that engaged in property management, where they handle a lot of client funds and where there's a lot more complicated financial transactions. So 6 months for the larger brokerages, 12 months for the smaller ones with less activity. When we went down to 2, it's gone to 9 and 18, just the simple math. They have been able to keep up fairly well. With the COVID was a challenge. We did do more exams by mail, and it is possible to do that, but you lose that opportunity to be in the office and have that conversation with the person, and then to sort of have the open conversation and questions and the back and forth about what we're doing here, what we're doing there, and what we could do better and how we could improve things. So COVID was a challenge. We kept up with it pretty well through changing our procedures, but and we do exams by mail for people who are out of state. We do exams by mail for people who don't have any activity, but we still go out the old-fashioned way, talk to people, try to give them good advice on how to comply with the Real Estate License Act, and that is where we're at today.
Senator Dorn.
Thank you, Senator Whistler. Thank you for coming. Do you handle, I call it complaints, if somebody, they're sick, and how are those, do those get handled before these timely audits or these type audits, or how does that?
Well, that's a very good question. On a daily basis, we talk to people about potential complaints, and we give advice about the License Act, things like that. But as far as formal complaints, which are actually filed, they have to be sworn in front of a notary. The numbers are from the high 20s to the 40s a year as far as formal complaints. In a typical year, we might have 1 or 2 that arise out of these trust account examinations. As I said, they are primarily for educational purposes. If we go back and our educating isn't working, then we try the regulate approach, but we try the educate approach first. The rest of those complaints are generally generated by the public and in some cases other licensees.
Any other questions, Senator Erdman?
Thank you, Senator Busher. So how long has this public member been vacant?
The third auditor has been.
No, right here on the board.
Oh, the public, I'm sorry, on our board, the public member? I'm sorry, the public member has been vacant since the 1st of this year. So I think the governor's probably busy making a lot of appointments, so we haven't gotten that one yet.
Okay.
Any additional questions? Okay, the one question I have is, in the governor's recommendation and a discussion that we had, is that your current cash funds could handle this increase and the PSL. Can you explain to us why that wouldn't be the case? Well,
yeah, we are funded by license fees, and as I stated, our activity has been up. So even though we've lowered fees, our revenues are up. We currently have a cash fund balance of over $1 million. Our operating expenses for a year are approximately 1.4. We evaluate every year where we are at, revenues versus expenditures, and adjust the fees accordingly. I would anticipate for the next couple of years, unless things go away, I mean, even if they go a little south, unless they go way far south, we'll be just looking at having, keeping our fees the same or even lowering them again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Any additional proponents?
That vacant spot, can former state senators?
Any
be on it?
opponents? Seeing none. Anyone in the neutral?
Could you?
Okay, we do have, before we close this, we do have one letter of support to proponent to read into the record from the Nebraska Realtors Association. Thank you. So that closes the hearing for Agency 41, and we'll open the hearing for Agency 53. Welcome, Director.
Thank you. My name is Tyler Coates, TYLERKOHTZ, and I'm the Director for the Nebraska Real Property Appraiser Board. The board is the agency that oversees all the appraisers in the state of Nebraska and then also appraisal management companies. I want to thank the committee for allowing me to speak on behalf of the board concerning the board's 2023 to 25 appropriations. It's essential that the agency operates with the highest efficiency and effectiveness, and the board strives to provide the most effective service while eliminating burdensome requirements to prevent those from becoming appraisers. Also, maintaining fiscal responsibility is very important to the board. With that being said, I'd like to point out that the board is cash funded and has not had a fee increase during my 12 years as director. In fact, we've had one fee decrease for appraisal renewal, fees of $25. The board sincerely appreciates the committee's funding of the board's issue request for the DAS assessment changes and for our technology maintenance. Also for funding for the state enterprise issues concerning salaries and health insurance. The committee appears to have a solid understanding of the board's mission and vision, and these funding considerations assist the board with meeting its goals while providing the best service that it can. As for the board's request for an increase of funding to the contractor fees, the board accepts that this request was not included in the committee's preliminary determination, and the board will look for other ways to, within its existing appropriation, to meet this demand. As mentioned in the 2023-25 biannual budget request issue, additional FTE teammate, since 2017, significant task creep has begun to impede the agency's effectiveness and efficiency. Although many steps have been taken during this time to increase efficiency, the pace at which agency staff must move now, must operate, can't keep up with the current workload. It's exceeding its capabilities. I've provided a copy of the board's issued detail report from our biannual budget request and would like to offer some information contained in it. Under the section, and I have this as an attachment on the back of your packet, rationale for request. AMC renewal applications are utilizing significant staff resource each year due to changes made in the AMC rule. When the LB 17 was approved and adopted, changes to the AMC Registration Act required additional requirements on top of what was in place prior to that. We assumed at the time that the number of registrations would drop from 100 to the 60s, and that never took place. There were more strict requirements, and so we thought there'd be attrition in the market, and that never occurred. It's held steady in the 90s. Right now, we're currently at 85. The AMC renewal period was also reduced from 2 years to 1 year to meet AMC Federal Registry reporting requirements. And so instead of processing 50 AMC renewal applications a year, now we process approximately 90 a year. With the additional requirements, it's a far more complex analysis than what it was going back to 2017. When I started looking at what our staff is experiencing, I look at everything from a data perspective. So the first thing I did was start tracking how much time we're spending on things and what we're applying that time to. So I put together some information between 2017 and 2022, and going back to the AMC registration processing, we've added an extra 558 hours per year for this task compared to 2017. During what we call the real property appraiser renewal season, we process approximately 400 to 500 renewal applications in a 2-month period. We usually bring on additional temporary staff from the SOS program. And the last 3 years what we've been getting out of that program has been very inconsistent. And in fact, what we received this year, we had to let that individual go because they were doing more harm than help. Last year, we had an individual that decided to take on a second job and reduced her hours. By the end, she was down to 20 hours a week, which was helping us very little, but helping, I guess. The year before, we had an issue where we had 2 20-hour employees. One didn't make it through the entire season, and we had to rely on one other 20-hour employee to assist with the processing of these applications. Like I said, this year, the individual didn't work out with us, and we have a staff of 3, me and 2 others, and we had to process all of these applications. It caused a significant burden on our employees, and it really harmed our morale. And this is not something that's new. It's something that's been going on for a couple of years. I keep waiting for it to stop, but it doesn't stop. So this is the point where something new needs to happen. Something needs to change in what we're doing. Going down to some other things that have affected it, because we have an increase in the number of AMC applications we're processing a year and new appraiser applications are on the increase, our accounting functions are more complicated. We've increased the number of deposits that we process per year from 211 to 323, 53% increase, and tracking the hours figured up to be 356 more hours of work in accounting than what it was previously between 2017 and 2022. In 2021, the real property appraiser qualifications criteria and the AQB cap approval program policies and procedures were changed to include, if you want to call it, Zoom classes for continuing education. So it's classes that are similar to online, or similar to in-class, but they're taken online, but they're not true online classes. So before 2021, that wasn't an option for real property appraisers. And so when that was brought in, it brought in a third component to education. So you have the classroom classes, online classes, and now you have these Zoom classes, hybrid classes that we also have to process applications for from education providers. I would say it wasn't a full third increase. I'd say it was more of a 25% increase. It's replaced some of the typical traditional classroom classes that we see applications for. So, but nonetheless, it has increased our workload quite a bit. Moving on to some of the other things here. Technology is one of the things that helps us save time. And so we spend a lot of time building our education functions. We have what's called the appraiser portal. And in that, they can change their contact information. They can upload all their continuing education certificates. It comes directly into our database, and we can approve it or deny it directly from the database. So no papers transferred during that process. They can download their registration, a copy of it. They can renew their credential online. And right now, we're on the process of building the AMC aspect of it, to where they can maintain their data themselves, where it just pulls right into our database. They'd be able to renew their registration, which is a neat thing because it'll auto-populate all of the things that we have to manually do now in terms of figuring out their beginning and end date for federal reporting, what their requirements are for how many appraisers are on their panel. So a lot of that will become automated through the database portion of that. So we have to do all that testing ourselves, all the beta testing. So it's me and myself and 2 other staff members make sure that that is ready for public consumption. And so that takes a significant amount of time to spend making sure that those programs are working properly and are effective in the way that they're supposed to be. Moving into the future, I don't know if you followed much, but there was some significant news about discrimination in the appraiser industry lately, and that's been a big topic in Washington. There was the PAVE action plan to advance property appraisal and valuation equity that was commissioned by the President's administration and 13 federal agencies. There was also a report called the Independent Analysis of Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice and Real Property Appraiser Qualifications Criteria to address diversity and discrimination in the appraiser industry. Once a year, I attend a conference, or twice a year, I should say, I attend a conference where all the state agencies get together and discuss issues faced in the industry. One of the things that's become obvious is the appraisal subcommittee and the GSEs and the Appraisal Foundation have already begun discussing how they're going to start collecting appraiser-related data from states to develop more understanding of appraiser-related information and patterns. That's going to come down on us. We're going to end up being the ones collecting that data and passing it on to them, just like we do for appraiser renewals and then also AMC renewals. So moving into the future, there's going to be some changes that are going to affect how we operate as a staff. I do want to point out that in terms of our peers, we're one of the top performing appraiser regulatory programs in the country. Our last 2 audits from the appraisal subcommittee, we got ratings of excellence for both our appraiser and AMC programs. We have one of the fastest turnaround times for appraiser credentialing and temporary credentialing. And that's a testament to how hard we work to keep this going, but it's starting to fall down already. And I don't want to get to the point where we're losing what we've accomplished in my 12 years. Another thing that I want to point out in terms of audits, our last fiscal audit, the attestation report had no findings in it. So we're fiscally very responsible with the state's money and the appraiser's money. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but it does affect our employee morale. And it's kind of, I feel like a good analysis, a way to say this would be, we're like a car going down the interstate that's floored. Eventually that car is going to give out. It's just the way it is. It can't go like that forever. It has to eventually, the motor will give out if it keeps doing that. We're starting to get to that point. During the last renewal season, I had one employee that I had to sit there and hug because she was crying because she's so overwhelmed with her workload. She's also on anxiety medication now because of the amount of work she's doing. I had another employee that was with us for 4 years, and she wanted to do something easier. And so she can go be a barista or work at an ice cream shop for the same amount of money, which is not nearly the effort that she has to put in. And so it does have an effect on our employees. And so that's part of the reason why it's so important to me. I mentioned the appraisal subcommittee earlier, and they're the federal agency that oversees us, and they're required, they review each state's compliance with the requirements of Title 11 and are authorized by Title 11 to take action against non-complying state appraiser regulatory programs if the policies, practices, and procedures are inconsistent with the requirements of Title 11. ASC Policy Statement 1B also requires that each state's appraiser and AMC program are sufficiently funded and staffed to carry out its Title 11 duties. I want to keep that where we're at right now. If the board's unable to maintain its current effectiveness and efficiency, credential holders, the mortgage loan industry, and the public would be negatively impacted. Governor Pillins mentioned investments many times when discussing the use of state money. There's also another part of this that I would like to bring to your attention. The appraisal subcommittee provides grants to support state agencies' compliance with Title 11. And the board has not participated in this program. And I think last year they gave out or had available $3 million to states to use for various projects. Not all of it is used, not even close to all of it. And I think last year they ended up around $500,000. In the packet I gave you the website for that. And then also in the back is I found online what some of the programs were using the funding for. This is something that if we had at the time, I would like to start doing is utilizing this federal grant program to further enhance our technology functions and offerings, removing this burden from real property appraisers, AMCs, and education providers. And also on top of that, to help reduce the amount that would be going out, we would redirect partial overtime and comp time based funds to this position, as the need for overtime would be significantly less having a third permanent person on staff. So that would help out in that area. So that money wouldn't be needed in those categories anymore. With that being said, the board's requesting that the committee provide the funding for one additional FTE administrative specialist classified position, and the amount of, this is total including PSL and non-PSL aspects of hiring a new employee, $45,201 for fiscal year 24, $47,790 for fiscal year 25, is found in the board's biennial budget request. If this request for funding is approved, the board will ensure that the current quality standards are met, proper funding is in place to meet the demands of Title 11. If this funding is not approved, the board will have to prioritize its needs, its staff, how it addresses the public, credential holders, appraisal management companies, and education providers. As mentioned previously, the board hasn't had an increase in fees in the past 12 years, but revenue has actually been steadily increasing, and that's a direct correlation to the increased workload that we're experiencing. I also included in the back of that packet from the biennial budget request, the funds analysis report that shows even with the additional FTE, the appraiser fund and the AMC fund would still remain stable. The board has the funds to support this position in the current state, so there would be no fee increases included with that. So that's the FTE aspect of it for the new employee. I do want to bring up another issue. The board appreciates the committee's inclusion of the 2023 deficit request for health insurance cost change. That employee, the basis of the request for is no longer with the agency. So I would like to request that the committee consider amending that from $5,905 to $3,783. The board has hired a new employee and they chose the wellness health plan for 24-25. And as such, I don't think there's anything in our budget request that accounts for that as well for the next biennium. So I'm asking that $3,783 plus the enterprise issue amount of 4% be added for healthcare insurance costs for both years for our new employees' health insurance. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for everything you guys do. And I guess if you have questions, let me know.
Thank you, Director. Any questions? Senator.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. So you're asking for 45,201 and 36,093 for PSL. Can you hire somebody for that?
Yeah, that would be the basis for that classification. The base level is 1756 right now, which comes up to 36,000 approximately, a little bit over.
They can make that much money working at McDonald's, can't they?
That's one of the problems I'm having, yes.
I don't think that's enough.
I would take more if you have if you're willing. So that, I want to be responsible with it. This is the first time I've ever asked for such a request. We've always managed and we've always done a pretty good job at it. When I see what I'm seeing from my employees, that's the point where I say this is not going to work anymore. I can't have employees crying on me. That's just not the way it's supposed to work. So.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any additional proponents for Agency 53? Any opponents? Anyone in the neutral? Okay, well, that then closes the hearing for Agency 53, and we will open the hearing for Agency 63.
You're getting here.
Good afternoon, members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Dan Sweetwood. It's Dan Sweetwood. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska State Board of Public Accounts. I've been fortunate to be in that position for over 20 years now. And Randy and Michael announced their retirement. We're all up on the 4th floor with the first admin building. But no, I got a few more years to go. But I'll tell you what, just speaking of Randy and Michael, personally, I interact with their employees up there on the 4th floor, and they are two wonderful public servants that are going to be truly missed. Nebraska State Board of Public Accountancy is Agency 63. Board is made up of 6 current certified public accountants and 2 public members appointed by the governor to 4-year terms. The board important duties include overseeing the uniform CPA exam, the NASTY exam, registering and issuing permits to practice public accountancy, overseeing the continuing education requirements of CPAs, and overseeing peer review requirements for CPA firms, and enforcing the provisions within the Public Accountancy Act and board regulations. We also investigate complaints and, when necessary, sanction registrants and permit holders who do not uphold the various standards of the profession. As you're aware, we are a small board. You guys deal with the gamut. Large agencies, we're one of those small agencies. And we enjoy that. We think that makes us a little more efficient. We run maybe more like a small business. It's kind of all hands on deck to get the job done when we need to. And I've always appreciated that, working for a small board. And as you know, we are cash funded by our registrants and permit holders. And so obviously we're accountable to them also. And when you're accountable to certified public accountants, you better be transparent and be straight up with the things we're trying to accomplish and do. With the direct input of the board's executive committee, our budget was developed and proposed before the board at their September 2022 meeting. Based on initial meetings, it was determined the board should request, within a budget deficit request, a small transfer from the board's operation fund to our personal service limitation, PSL, to assist in ensuring we would not exceed our PSL this fiscal year. That was based on, again, you've heard maybe the theme, attempting to keep 2 longtime employees. And so we did work with state personnel and were able to raise within the new limits. They were able to go up a couple steps. So that was a good thing. We appreciate the governor's and now your committee's recommendation that occur. Within our next biennial budget request, we again did request another transfer from our operations fund to our PSL with the same issue, that going into the next budget, the board would have some flexibility within the PCL. This was a direct request from our board. They wanted to have some flexibility within the PSL. Again, we do appreciate the governor's and now your committee's recommendation that this occur. Again, this is not a request of additional appropriation. This is just an internal transfer from our operations fund to our PSL. As you can see within our budget request, there's 2 areas that have come into focus. One is the board is very concerned, as I just talked about, motivated to keep the current 3-member staff. We have over 35 years' experience. Again, we think that means something, very important. We've also, obviously my 2 staff members, they're get glowing, reviews and things from CPAs, people that are interacting with them. It's also, we have engaged a new IT provider that's after many years of research and vetting that we hope will allow us to become even more efficient with the hope of even a better online experience for our registrants and permit holders. We've built these online programs and we've gotten good feedback, but we want to go to that next level. We want that CPA or that registrant to go and open that account. And then everything, their history and everything's there. And we think that'll be a great benefit. I welcome you to our website. If you ever have any questions, there's an annual letter that we publish every year in the spring, kind of tells what we're doing. And I also welcome you to one of our board meetings. And you can see what we're doing, how we're doing it, and these volunteer board members and some of the important things that they have to wrestle with. So we always appreciate them. I did see when I came in on the list out here, we were issued as Agency 63, the Board of Public Policy. Now that's pretty interesting. We're going to have to do a fiscal note for that if we're going to be the Board of Public Policy. But no, we are the Board of Public Accountancy. I'll get on and tell my board members that we're the new Board of Public Policy. So, no. So anyway, I'll take any questions, anything.
Thank you, Director. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else here in support of Agency 63? Any opponents? Anyone in the neutral? We don't have any letters for the record, so that will close the hearing for Agency 63, and we will open the hearing for Agency 58.
Thank you, Senator Wishart, members of the committee. My name is John Wilbeck, Jonwilbeck. I'm the director of the Nebraska Board of Engineers and Architects, and I'm going to make this very brief for everybody. I've reviewed the committee's preliminary budget operations, and I can support the recommendations in the committee's preliminary budget. Just some background for those who are not familiar with my board. We were established in 1937. We're an independent agency. My board is composed of 8 members appointed by the governor, 4 professional engineers, 3 architects, and 1 member of the public. We are solely cash funded through license and exam application and renewal fees. Our 2 main functions are to ensure that those who practice architecture and engineering are qualified to do so. And we also enforce the provisions of the act that essentially determine when projects in Nebraska need to have architects and professional engineers involved in their design and construction. We currently have about 8,700 engineers who are licensed by our board and 1,800 architects. About 2/3 of those are non-resident. They reside outside Nebraska. I will also note a couple other things. We do administer services for 2 other boards, the Board of Landscape Architects and the Board of Geologists. They are also similarly cash funded, but they don't have they don't generate the revenue enough to hire their own staff. So we prepare an MOU every year and administer their services for them. Lastly, our last 3 fees adjustments have been reductions. License applications were $100 when I first came to the board in 2008. Those are now $80. And we did introduce a tiered certificate of authorization fee schedule. And those are for organizations who provide architectural or engineering services. We did charge a flat fee when I first came to the board, but now we have a tiered fee schedule. So those firms with 1 to 5 licensees pay half of what they used to pay when I first came to the board, and the larger firms, of course, pay a higher fee. That is essentially an overview of our board, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Senator Dorn?
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Thank you for being here. And I'm don't know if you're the right person to ask this or not.
Okay.
Do you, or when somebody's building a building out there, a new business, maybe a restaurant or whatever.
Right.
And the fire marshal gives them the okay to go ahead and build. I've had several people from my district call me that 4 months, 6 months into this, now the state board of engineers, architects comes in and says, oh, this isn't met or this isn't met. I even had one of them tell me if they would have known the cost was that much, they wouldn't have completed their project, except they were 2/3 of the way through it.
Sure.
So is that something you oversee or look at?
The Engineers and Architects Regulation Act says that on certain projects of a certain size and complexity, it's really based on 2 factors. Number one, it's occupancy classification per the state building code. So a church, like an assembly, is that level is 1,000 square feet. So anything above that size, if it involves the practices of architecture and engineering, per our act, a licensee has to be involved in the design and oversee construction. Part of the thing that our board struggles with is everyone knows that in the state, it seems everyone knows about the state fire marshal. No one knows about us. So how do we get the word out? There's an education component that we are trying to do, and we've had some issues with, we have a dedicated public information officer on our board. And that position has been very transitory over the past year and a half. We've hired someone at the beginning of this last year. We think we'll do a better job, and we're trying to strategize how do we get the word out to the public, number one, that we exist, and number two, that the act says that these things about when projects need architects or engineers. The good thing is what the board, we don't take a punitive role. We don't, our board isn't going to bring the hammer down and levy fines. All really the board is worried about is the health, safety, and welfare, the occupants of that structure. And so the board has almost, in every case, allowed that owner to go ahead and engage the architects and engineers, review the project construction status, how it is now. If there's anything that those licensees need to be changed, dealing with the structure, the means of egress, life safety, that the licensees work with those owners to get those changes implemented. And once the licensees are satisfied that the project is now up to snuff, so to speak, then the board just steps away and says, okay, it's good.
I will agree with your one statement, I guess, and this is a question because I've had 3 different ones now contact me. And to me, there's a disconnect between most of them in our rural areas. Most of them, once the fire marshal gives the okay, they believe that they're ready to go and can go. And is there a disconnect between you and the fire marshal, or the fire marshal not getting back to you, or why, or the education part to these people out there, because they haven't been told about the engineer certification until they're way too deep into the project to quit.
Right. Part of the issue is that the fire marshal's mission and the board's mission are completely 2 separate things. The fire marshal is really looking, as I understand it, and I can't really speak for the fire marshal, but I understand it, they look at project for fire safety and life safety only. If there's a building code issue, potentially I don't know that the fire marshal gets that much involved in those aspects of it, because they're enforcing these specific codes.
So I'll go back to my question
Yeah.
again. How can we connect the 2 dots better, or where is that education part is missing, or what? Because even talked to a meeting one time out in Grand Island, a guy that was up by Kearney, and he had no idea until they were way past.
Right. I can tell, I think to help answer that point, we have a very close relationship with the state fire marshal. I think Doug Hoboyne right now is an acting state fire marshal. We're actually talking about ways, how can we best educate the public on not only that we exist, but here's what we enforce and what our job is. We actually have a joint webinar scheduled with the state fire marshal on just, this webinar is geared for licensees to ask questions about what the fire marshal's office does, what do they enforce, and so we're trying to use the information we gain from that to kind of parlay, okay, how can we
what's the best way to get out to the public? And, in the past, we've reached out to organizations like the Nebraska Association of Code Officials, and the County Officials Association, the League of Municipalities. So we're trying to leverage, get in, they have conferences every year. Is there a way we can get in front of those people who are actually on the front lines enforcing this in their local communities? How can we best partner with them to help get the word out? Because we're trying to do this as efficiently as everyone else is. So those are some strategies we're trying to.
Thank you for answering those.
Senator Dover.
I'm only familiar with our area, but if I was going to build in Norfolk, we have to do a building permit. If I'm going to build in Madison County, I have a building permit. I'm pretty sure in the city, they're gonna tell us if this building meets this, we're gonna be told that we have to have the stamp to get it done. Don't all counties across Nebraska have a building permit process?
I don't believe they do.
Well, that's probably the problem.
It could be a part of the problem.
And it's Scott Cordes is the new fire marshal.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
He oversaw permits and codes in Norfolk.
Okay.
So he's very familiar with that, so he's honestly a fantastic guy. He'd be really good to work with.
Norhughes, did you say?
Pardon?
Steve Norhughes?
He oversaw Steve.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Steve Norhughes in Norfolk pretty well.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah, Scott was over Steve.
Excellent.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional proponents? Anyone in opposition? Neutral? Okay, seeing none, we don't have any letters for this agency, so that will close the hearing for Agency 58. We do have letters for Agency 59, Agency 66, and Agency 73. And so that will close the hearings for the day. Thank you.
Just like that? Just like that, you're in there?
I move to adjourn.